Our guest this time is Nick DiNardo. He's an entrepreneur, a consultant, a public speaker, podcaster, and an author, and he focuses on adversity, personal growth, and education. In this episode, we talk about the life and business experiences that led to Nick's book. We discuss his publishing journey, and Nick shares how you can leverage adversity to reach your next victory. Here's that conversation. And now I'm talking with Nick DiNardo. He is an entrepreneur, a consultant, a public speaker, and his topics include adversity, personal growth, and education. He has a brand new book, The Game of Adversity, 8 Practices to Turn Life's Toughest Moments into Your Greatest Opportunities. Nick, thank you for being on the show.
Chris, thanks for having me. Appreciate you having me on.
Okay, the new book is about leveraging the bad things in life and turning them into something great. It can be bad things in, life, bad things with relationships and family, but also, bad things in business, bad things in the economy. And you've got strategies for helping people to keep going. These are how to keep going. These are how to make your life better out of this. So what was it about your attitude or your experiences that kept you going?
Yeah, no, you summed it up very, very well. So, the whole thesis really is that, we're giving conflicted ideas about adversity. On one hand, we'll consume, numerous stories through movies, documentaries, whether it's media, about how somebody has overcome adversity, whether it's Rocky or a local story about somebody overcoming cancer and then using that story to help hundreds or thousands of people. We see these stories all the time, and we understand the benefits and the underdog type story. We always relate to that underdog. But when it comes to our own stories, we are often avoiding adversity, and we're taught that at a young age, whether it's our parents trying to protect us from danger, from harm. We are constantly trying to avoid this sort of adversity. But in my experience, I'll give you my own story and really what's motivated me and the passion behind this project. I believe that adversity creates opportunity, and adversity a lot of times is our biggest asset. But the only way to take advantage of that adversity is if we have the right skill sets to identify it and use it to our advantage. I grew up middle class. My parents were married. We had a 3,000 square foot house in southeastern Massachusetts. When I was 7, we were living a great life. By the time I was 8, my mother was in the hospital. She was diagnosed with bipolar and was in a mental hospital for a while. My parents divorced, and we lost our house. And I remember that next year, after my mother got better again, probably 500 square foot room with a shared kitchen with about 17 other families that we had to use together. And I would sleep on the floor of this room. And I was 8 or 9 years old. And I just remember saying to myself, there's no possible way that this can be what our family deserves at this point. I didn't know how that was going to manifest itself later on and how that would serve as a real adversity moment, learning moment for me. But that's one of many that I go back to. I go back to the well on that a lot because that drives me to really leverage that moment to my advantage. And I think I have an advantage because I had to deal with that. Where a lot of people would say, "Oh, divorce. You had to deal with divorce. You have to deal with those sorts of setbacks. Those hurt you at that moment." But I think if we're able to use it to our advantage, it becomes one of our differentiators.
So now, what was it that inspired you to take these ideas and make a book out of it?
I thought a lot about it over the years, and I never really understood how I could kind of take this idea and turn it into a book. From idea to actually execution. So, I work in the education industry as well. And one of the big themes over the last couple of years is really a focus on non-cognitive skills, the building of resilience and grit over just content knowledge, whether it's in K through 12 education or college education. But I had this idea and I started probably building my writing habit. I'm a very new writer here, after being really interested in it in high school, but really developed my habits over the past year and a half. And I started to riff off of a couple of people in these circles, and I said, I've got this idea. What is my first step here in trying to turn this into a book? They suggested, building this into a book outline. So we started to frame this thing out and to see, if there was something here that we could turn into an overall thesis for the book. And it ended up turning out to be, 120, 130 page book that's focused on each chapter is focused on a sport. I use sports as a vessel to show this thesis because I think sports, number one, is a microcosm for life. I think we can learn a lot of life lessons from sports. And number two, sports is a community building thing. Whether or not you played or you didn't play, typically there's a sports team or something, that you understand the general, thesis of sports or the benefits of sports, or you're attached to a couple of, players in that sort of way. So I wanted to use sports stories as kind of the framework for showing the benefits. And then I also tie these in with concrete evidence from brain plasticity, from neuroscience, from positive psychology, and different things to really show that this has validity, that this has research validity to it. And then in each chapter, I also follow it up with an application. Okay, now how do you use this? What's the first step to try and use this principle to your advantage? I try and lay out each chapter with a story, some concrete evidence, some science, and then some application.
What you're talking about, it's not just about having a positive attitude. It's about actually doing things actively.
That's exactly right. I think that's the key point for me. It's okay. Adversity is full of opportunity. Great. That's a great idea. But what do you do with that? That's the thing. And I mean, just for an example, the first principle, which is the foundational principle in the book, is building a growth mindset, which is something that you and your listeners may be familiar with, which is Dr. Carol Dweck's work. She's a psychologist at Stanford University. And what she did was she did research with young kids and had kids from different backgrounds, different demographics, races, and gave them a specific challenge. She would have these kids go through these challenges. And what she found was there was a pretty much 50-50 difference between the kids that would go through this challenge and just completely back off and shut down and feel discouraged and feel as if they were dumb. And then also these kids that would say, okay, I'm having some trouble with this, but I'm being challenged. I can learn something from this. What's the next approach that I can take, to this exercise? And that was the difference. That was what her thesis became of fixed mindset people and growth mindset people. Now, the biggest part of this research is that if you have a fixed mindset, you can develop a growth mindset. I think that's the biggest piece, is that it's not just this nature versus nurture idea, and this is what you are. It is the diagnosis and identification of what you may default to, but you can grow into this growth mindset, which is what builds resilience, builds persistence, allows you to overcome anxiety and adversity in a much better way. So that's just one example of a principle that I use. And I don't know how much you want me to go into an example like that. I don't want to take us too off course, but just one example from sports is Bill Walsh, who, is the head coach and general manager for the San Francisco 49ers. He's also the innovator of the West Coast offense. And when he was, getting into the business, he had a lot of trouble. First of all, he had a very rocky relationship with his father early on, which, shaped a lot of his initial feelings and attitudes. But he went to junior college to play football for a couple of years and then went to San Jose State. And a lot of people who got into coaching at that point or into management in the NFL had great pedigrees. They went to the best football schools, were the best players, and they were the coaches. So he had a lot of trouble getting in because he didn't have this sort of pedigree. So that, again, shaped a lot of his attitudes and his mindset, and he became a much more detail-oriented and smarter coach because of it. So when he got to the Cincinnati Bengals when he was 35 as the offensive coordinator, he had this quarterback named Virgil Carter, who was a mobile quarterback who did not have a strong arm but had an accurate arm. And Bill had this vertical passing attack that he had gotten from the Oakland Raiders previous to that. Those are two conflicting things. He had this mobile quarterback with not a strong arm, and he had this vertical passing attack approach to the game. And he had to readjust and create, really out of necessity, a new offense that was going to fit this quarterback. And he created the West Coast offense, which is really horizontal passing attacks to take advantage of Virgil's mobility and his accuracy. And he ended up becoming a successful quarterback for a couple of years. And that's what he used with Joe Montana later on, where he won 3 Super Bowls, and the San Francisco 49ers ended up winning 5 total when he was the general manager. So that's an example of a growth mindset, taking a problem where somebody who had a fixed mindset would say, okay, I have this system, this quarterback's completely different. Woe is me, this is not going to work, I'm going to fail. Am I dumb? Am I not able to, this is somebody else's problem. Whereas he said, let me see what I can do to innovate here. What can I do to take on this challenge and overcome? So that's just an example in sports of how he was able to utilize a growth mindset.
As you talk about that, I can completely think of conversations I've had with people where you've just explained to me the impasse we reached, that those were people that every time they say, I choose to fail, I choose not to understand this.
Right.
You've completely explained so many conversations in my life. Oh,
good. I'm glad.
From the standpoint of the author who's listening, some of the adversity that would come to mind for that person is, it's hard enough to write a book, but then there's all of the editing, there's the revising, there's packaging, there's publishing. And then on top of that, there's book promotion, and then there's figuring out how to find time to make another book. So taking kind of this adversity mindset that we're discussing and applying it to the author who's like, this person's about to give up because it seems too hard. What advice do you have for an author who's overwhelmed by publishing and promoting their book?
I so feel I completely sympathize with that feeling, because I've been there myself, and it can be overwhelming. One of the principles in my book is called process versus outcome, and I think that is probably the one thing, if I was going to say to a listener or a reader of your blog who is going through that and is just overcome with paralysis by analysis, I would say focus on the process rather than the outcome. So I recently saw a video of Stephen King talking about writing, and he's obviously got the great book on writing, about writing, but it's like this 3-minute clip, and he talks about the books on his bookshelf and how he looks at the books as dead skin at that point, because he doesn't care about the outcome. What he loves is the process, is the pulling of the thread to see what's going to come out at the end of that story. And I thought that was just an amazing way to kind of look at it. And he's unique. He's obviously got a different talent level than some of us. But to look at it that same way, either kind of take a look at the whole process itself and bullet point it, and say, I'm going to focus on the first mini step of the first step here. So what do I need to do to develop my writing habit? Do I need to write 500 words today? And it doesn't matter what those words are. I'm not going to put that pressure on myself and do that for a week. Start to develop that habit and say, okay, what's the next step here? Or I'm going to start to outline what I want this book to mean to people, or what I want the readers to get out of this book. Just taking one step at a time, I think, is huge, and takes a lot of that pressure off, and then allows you to continue to move the ball forward rather than just kind of sitting there in a state of anxiety and stress. Hopefully that makes sense.
Oh, completely. So now let's talk about your podcast. You have a new podcast, the Sweet Adversity Podcast.
Yes.
There's the book, and then there's the podcast. Which direction does it go? Is it that you're hoping people who read the book will listen to the podcast, or are you using the podcast to drive people to buy the book?
Yeah, I'm using the podcast. Number one, it's almost a self-interest type thing. I like having conversations with people about this sort of subject. So I have, Olympic athletes, writers, entrepreneurs, different people who are high performers in different areas, or who just have a great story to tell about overcoming something. And I just want to use that as extra stories or extra fuel to show people that adversity can become an opportunity if you use it the right way. So it's just, another piece of content for the blog, but that's kind of the way I'm looking at it. But it's kind of a self-interest thing, and then also another content to really support the overall thesis of the book.
To try not to jump too far ahead, but it's now podcast related, the question in my head. We're going to be talking a little bit about you have plans to do another book. I wonder, is it a similar topic, and is the podcast a way for you to then research actually that next book?
It's a really good question. I don't know I have a couple of ideas for what I want the next book to be, but I also like to challenge myself, and sometimes I get myself out of my core competencies, my comfort zone a little bit. But most recently, I've wanted to write something more in the fiction area, and I haven't done anything like that in a long time. So right now, I'm kind of in research mode to understand form, structure, sequence, making sure that I've developed the habit of sitting down, having an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours to be able to write and develop that habit day in and day out. But understanding what's going to make a good story is something that I'm really working on as a lifelong learner here. So I think it might be something in the fiction realm, and I think it may have something to do with adversity as an overall theme. But I'm not sure. We'll see.
So it could still be related, but fiction.
Exactly.
Okay. Because my understanding is that like this your teachings on adversity, it's not just the book. It is a platform, right? It is a business.
Exactly. I started to really dig into this stuff, and I started to actually get some clients who were interested in learning some of these principles. That's what made me start to think about developing this book that would then, number one, serve as a larger, platform to be able to just help people, and obviously a cheap platform to be able to help people. But yeah, so I actually am an adversity strategist, so I kind of help people to really diagnose certain adversity moments in their life and then how to use them to their advantage and whatever their goals and objectives are.
So for some listeners then, maybe they haven't thought of this before. They need to think about not just how do I do this book, but how do I do things related to the book that are bigger than the book.
Right. Absolutely. And I'm kind of, it's almost it can almost be used as a business card for your overall brand strategy.
Right.
If possible.
And then something else that I wanted to touch on as a learning opportunity for the listener is that you, in the course of promoting your book, you contacted me about being on the DIY Author Show, and your approach was not, I have a book, let's talk about my book. Your approach was, how can I provide value to your listeners? To kind of pull the curtain back a little so that the listeners who haven't figured this out, clearly you do want to promote the book. Clearly you want to be on the show so people will hear about the book. But your approach is so different from other authors that they lead with, I have a book, talk about my book, instead of what you did, which is what I like my students in the courses we have at DIY Author University. I teach a lot of them that they have to flip that. They have to go the other direction. They have to say, how do I provide value first?
Yeah.
And so I wonder if you could speak us a little bit into what you did and why other authors should do it that way.
I think the number one thing that we need to focus on is being as authentic to ourselves and developing trust and respect as possible. And for me, the best way to do that I've found so I've been in business development and sales and marketing for a long time. And sales can get this really bad rap. A lot of times people think that it's all based on self-interest, and you're doing things for yourself and you're doing things for the company just to get sales commissions and all this sort of stuff. But to me, it's not about that. If we focus on the best people who are delivering a ton of value are focusing on what's going to be best for the customer. For me, when I reached out to you, Chris, I said, first of all, I'm a fan of what Chris is doing with DIY Author. I utilize a lot of the content on your site. I'm looking to make sure that the readers and the listeners are going to get, first of all, if this topic is even beneficial to the audience, and number two, how do I provide the best value so I'm not wasting anybody's time? And if you approach it that way, then probably I will start to get some respect back for the content that I may talk about. So for me, that's the way I go about it. And it makes me feel good approaching business that way. It really does in relationships, because it's more of a give rather than a take.
So you're an author who is an entrepreneur. A lot of independent authors are finding themselves in this place where they have to think more like an entrepreneur, and it's such an alien concept to them. Whereas to you, it sounds like it's probably a little more natural. You were an entrepreneur first, and then you became an author. To the person coming from the other direction, I just write, I just want to do my books. Oh, now I have to be an entrepreneur. What advice do you have for that person about this is how you get started? This is how you start thinking like an entrepreneur?
For me, if it's really uncomfortable for you, like for me in the writing process, I was getting overwhelmed with, okay, what do I do for book design? What do I do for editing? I'm not a professional editor and I don't really want to focus on it because I don't have the time or the inclination to do it. So I found experts to help with those specific pieces of the process that were going to help make my book great and also outsource some of these things off my hands. So number one, if it's really going to make you uncomfortable and you don't want to do it, some of these, maybe you bullet point out certain parts of the entrepreneurship kind of process or whatever process you're struggling with as an author. And you potentially look to the community or look for freelancers who can potentially help you with that. I'm not sure if that's even possible, but it's just one strategy. But number two, in becoming more comfortable with it, I think it is, doing some research, doing some due diligence and getting yourself a little bit more comfortable, finding somebody who's an author and who also you respect their ability to market in an authentic way and other parts of the process and see if you can model that behavior a bit better. That's what I do. I mean, one of the guys that I really respect is Tim Ferriss for his ability to be authentic, but also to write really, really valuable stuff. So he's focused on being creative, but he also has figured out the business development and marketing side because he's attempted to master all those different things. So he's kind of got that full holistic approach that I appreciate. So that's somebody I try and model.
Let's talk about your publishing experiences. This is your first book, and you used a system, I think you called it Book in a Box.
That's right.
What is that?
It's actually a company that Tucker Max, who many people would be familiar with from a couple of his best-selling books, and his partner, Zach Obront, started. So for me, I had this idea, and I was really, really overwhelmed with how I was going to structure this thing. I just didn't know how. I just think in outline form a lot, and that's the best way for me to kind of inform how I'm going to actually write. That's just the best process that works for me. I was looking for a system or something that was, or a set of talent that was going to help me get this book accomplished. And what they did was help me from stage one to stage final, pretty much of the process, which was getting this into book outline form, fleshing out the idea, getting the first draft completed, having expert eyes look at these drafts, and to provide editors who are going to help me to complete it, finding a great book designer who's going to make my book stand out from other self-published books, because this is still what they are as an independent publisher. They're helping authors make their self-published books, which may get lost in a lot of the shuffle, a lot of the different the books out there, and try and get them to stand out with really professional services around it. They provide these services at a cost, but I believe that the process itself, and they believe this as well, is valuable to anybody working through, self-publishing themselves. So whether or not you have the money to actually invest in a service like that, or just deconstruct the process to be able to do it yourself, I think is huge. They really helped me. The biggest thing that they helped me with was really establishing a firm book outline, which took probably 6 to 10 revisions before we got it right and said, okay, this is the right framework that we can tell this story.
Before this interview, you mentioned to me that you were going to take what you learned from this experience and you were planning your next book to be, you were going to go indie. You were going to be a self-publisher next time. What about that appeals to you?
I think it's a control thing for me. It's a really, really good question. So I've worked for a couple of the big publishers, a couple of the Fortune 500 publishers in the more textbook realm rather than the trade. And I just feel strongly that the value that we hold the control as the content creators and the authors. The control that the publishers had for many, many years was obviously in, a lot of these services that I just provided to you, which now can be done through freelancers. And the only real value that they provide now is in distribution to large wholesalers, like booksellers, I should say, like Barnes and Noble and those types of places. So if we can lay out and structure our approach the right way, and we obviously deliver great content, I think that we're in the driver's seat in the future of books in whatever form that they take.
So what about the publishing process as you've just done it for the first time? What about that process surprised you the most?
That's a great that's a great question.
I didn't mean to stump you. I'm sorry.
Let's see. Oh, it was probably a lot of the back end. So I have my book available on Amazon and ebook in print format. So I think it was the work that you have to put into the back end of Kindle Direct Publishing and Create Space to make sure that everything is professional and done right. I mean, it's funny because you focus so much on creating great content and focusing on book layout and design, but you don't realize all of the detail that goes into making sure that the book shows up the right way and looks professional, on Amazon. And I think it was just laying things out in that way and getting it ready to be marketed properly so that it looks really, really like an independent book rather than just kind of another self-published book. And I say that a lot because I think there's a big difference between independent being still self-published but more professional, like done like it should be. Like somebody could mistake it as a book at Random House or something like that.
That's like, I can't remember how to pronounce his name, but I think James Altucher, he said the difference is not traditional and self-published. The difference is professional and not professional.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, and I don't know how you went through the process yourself, Chris, but what would you say? What would you say the toughest thing for you was? I'm curious.
Oh gosh, you stumped me. When I think of the surprise to me was, and this was when I had my first book deal, how little the publisher followed through.
Right.
It's like they made the book, the truck took it out of the warehouse, and it's like they threw it out into a field and hoped somebody would find it. And it's like,
right.
How is that a professional publisher?
Yeah, you're one of a portfolio of other books. That's the thing. It's like they care to the extent that they're going to be able to sell books.
Right.
But you care most out of anyone. So that's, I guess, to me, like James Altucher, I mean, I follow James as well, but I just think if you can do it right, self-publishing is a great way to go about it. Ryan Holiday talks about how much he loves being able to go to traditional publishers and going that route, and he believes that they're providing enough value in the other aspects of the publishing process that it makes it worthwhile. So, I mean, it's just a preference thing, I guess.
Well, yeah, somebody one time asked, what was it like having a book deal? And said, well, it's just a series of broken hearts and lowered expectations. And, I will say, because, DOA author, we don't judge. And so that first deal was, let's see, like 20 years ago. Gosh, was it 20 years ago? Today, I am self-published, but I do have a book deal. I have a deal with the publisher, but it's a much different situation.
Right.
They're smaller. I know who the people are personally. And it's a completely different situation than I'm with some company that's in another, faraway company, and I'm just a name on a sheet. So yeah, it is about making choices, but it's about thinking through the ramifications of those choices.
Yeah, maybe some listeners can comment on this episode, but I'm interested in I wonder if most listeners are looking to self-publish or if they're looking to get traditionally published, if it's more of a branding thing so that they can actually say that they're a Random House author, or if it's just about getting the content out there.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder what it is.
Yeah, I think they're all over the place, but I think a lot of authors are figuring out, why even go to the traditional publisher. But then you run into authors that's what they want. They want the vindication. They want somebody to choose them.
Right.
Every author has to figure out his or her own journey. And so, it's really about, let's give that person all the necessary information so that they can make informed choices.
Absolutely.
To the person who is listening, and that person is, and circling back to your topic of, adversity, and so many people would let that stop them, and you're saying, don't let that stop, you keep going. What action step would you give to an author about getting his or her book made?
So at what point?
Let's say they have a manuscript and they're frustrated about turning that manuscript into a book.
I would break down the process, and I would completely take emotion out of it as much as you could possibly take emotion out of it. And I would look at some of the most successful authors out there, and I'm just a couple of nonfiction ones are coming off the top of my head. But Jack Canfield got turned down by 65 publishers before he got his first Chicken Soup for the Soul book published. And same thing with Tim Ferriss, 35 publishers. And there's multiple other stories like that. Oh, Seth Godin, another one, who had multiple publishers who continue to turn him down. Mm-hmm. I would just say the first step, let's get a general list of potential publishers who would be interested in this sort of content for their publishing house. And let's write them down and try and get contact information for them. And you've got to focus, like we said, about the value to them first rather than the value to you. So you don't make it generic. Just really do your research on that publishing house and make sure that you sit, when you email them, put together a compelling email that's not too long, that focuses on the points that are going to be valuable to them and how it potentially could make them money. So I would focus on, make a list of 50 and try and get as many contacts as you potentially can. Maybe that's 25. And then I would just email and call them, all once. And then put a reminder in your calendar for 2 weeks out and email them all again and see what you get for answers. And you may get 1, 2, 3 answers, but that's good. If you're getting some answers, that's good. If you're not getting any answers, try to make another list or try to leverage some of the things, maybe you leverage LinkedIn. I mean, Chris, you and I connected on LinkedIn through Michael Bosey, and, who knows what we're going to continue to interact with each other, but we ended up reconnecting, on LinkedIn, and this is the result of that. So I would just say try and take as much emotion out of it and then provide value to the person that you're trying to engage with. I think those are the two big things.
Well, Nick DiNardo, how can people find you online?
People can find out more about the book at thegameofadversity.com. There's a purchase link right in there, or you can just take a look at and see if the book is of interest to you.
And the word "the" is part of the title.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep. Thegameofadversity.com. And then I blog about the stories and science of adversity and building resilience and using it to your advantage at nickdinardo.com. And that's where you can find the Sweet Adversity podcast as well, which is on iTunes. Oh, one other thing. I have one extra coaching slot that has opened up. So if you're interested in that, or if anybody's interested in just having a conversation about how it could be beneficial, my email is DiNardo, DINARDO 33 @gmail.com.
And so you said people can find out about the podcast on the website. They can find it in iTunes. Are you in Stitcher?
I am in Stitcher. Yes.
Okay, great. I love Stitcher.
Do you? Good. It seems to be hit or miss with people, but I should start bringing it up more.
Well, Nick DiNardo, thank you very much for being with us this episode.
Chris, thanks so much for having me, and keep up the great work. You're really making a difference with everything you put out. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us this episode. Be sure and catch every episode of DIY Author. We're available in iTunes and Stitcher, and of course we have our own dedicated app. Just go to your favorite app store and search for DIY Author. This is Chris Well saying thanks for listening. I hope you'll join me again. This has been DIY Author. Please visit us online at DIYauthor.com and be sure to sign up for our email newsletter. If you enjoyed this program, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. Until next time, keep writing. And remember, do it yourself doesn't have to mean do it alone.